Hello and welcome to the i3 podcast, Conversations with Institutional Investors. My name is Wouter Klijn and I'm the editorial director for the Investment Innovation Institute. For more information about our educational forums for institutional investors, please visit our website at www.i3-invest.com. That's the letter I and the number 3-invest.com. There, you can also subscribe to our complimentary newsletter i3 Insights, in which we discuss investment strategy and asset allocation questions with asset owners from around the world. Now, as you all know, we love our disclaimers in this industry, so here's ours. This recording is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute financial advice and is intended for institutional and wholesale investors only. Please enjoy the show. In this podcast, I'm speaking with Kim Bowater, who is the Director of Consulting at Frontier Advisors. Kim has spent 23 years at the firm and saw the asset consultant grow from a small advisory firm with just 13 people when she started in 2002 to the leading asset consultant it is today. She is one of the driving forces behind a number of key initiatives that have supported Frontier's growth over the years, including the establishment of a technology platform that allows clients to access research online, and the initial setup of the retirement business. In this episode, we discuss how the continuously changing industry affects the role asset consultants play, the impact of AI, and gender diversity within the investment industry. Enjoy the show. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Wouter. How are you?
Pretty good. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
So why asset consulting? I think you started originally out as a actuarial consultant. How did you become involved with the asset consultancy side?
Yes, well, I did maths at university and took up an actuarial consulting role, which was coming from a scientific kind of family, a bit of a leap into the unknown. I worked with defined benefit funds, so in the superannuation space. But after a few years, I felt like I was more attracted to the asset side rather than the liability side. So started the CFA course and then kind of naturally moved into asset consulting. It was relatively kind of organic, one step at a time than an intentional path. But here I am still.
So what sort of science is your family into then?
My father was a senior lecturer of applied chemistry.
Okay.
And my mother was a pharmacist and she had a science degree as well. Yes, so there was no one in finance in my family at all, actually. So I thought, let's give something we don't know what it is, but we'll give it a go.
Is that your form of rebellion? No?
Yes. They were intrigued too. They were like,
Fair enough.
There you go.
and now you've been with Frontier for 23 years. So you don't see that too much anymore in the finance industry where everybody has like 2-year gigs. So 23 years, that's quite a long time. And you've now, climbed all the way up to part of the leadership team, part of the investment committee. But when you sort of look back on that period, was there anything that stood out for you as like, these are some of my standout moments?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a good journey. I think Frontier's also changed a lot, and our clients, particularly in the super space, have changed a lot over 23 years. So it feels like a role that's had a lot of change in it rather than kind of just one firm. I think when I started, we were under the leadership of Fiona Trafford-Walker, who many people will still remember as a leader in the industry, and Frontier had a really nice culture. I thought client focused, kind of team oriented, but forward looking, kind of challenging ourselves, and I think kind of one, it's not necessarily a stand-up moment, but I'm quite proud of the fact that we've managed to have a culture that's endured with those characteristics. That's something I'm quite proud of. Frontier's always been a good place to be part of, and we still hear that today.
Yeah, I think Fiona was one of the first people that I interviewed, I think, for this podcast series.
Ah,
That's
yes.
a while ago,
Yeah.
but yes, that's still one of my favorites.
I think also, just thinking about the evolution of advice, the different environments we've been through, COVID, GFC, all the evolution in the superannuation space that's impacted on investment processes and governance and portfolios, is something that, we've really focused on working with clients, to help them succeed. And I think, um, I feel that's been a really rewarding journey. I think for funds themselves as well as for ourselves, who are also here to kind of create good outcomes for members. We've done very well, in the external survey of asset consultants, which has been the Peter Lee survey for a long period of time,
Yep.
and that's always been a kind of standout moment for me and the team. To receive really positive feedback from our clients that we're actually, adding value, because you're always a step removed as an advisor in a way. I think as well from looking at Frontier as it's grown, when I joined, there was maybe 13 people.
Oh wow.
It was a pretty small, we all did something, we did a range of things. It was mostly super. Now, two-thirds of our clients are outside of super across a whole range of areas. We're working with clients in New Zealand and Japan, the Pacific. We have an office in Japan, and now recently announced a new independent CIO service. All of those are really significant kind of standouts, I
That
think, for
that was quite
Frontier.
an exciting announcement because I think to a degree it does change the business of Frontier a little bit because I think so far Frontier has been able to provide advice but not necessarily implement that advice. And now with this team up where you bring in the investment team of State Super, 14 people coming over, you actually will be able to implement that as well. It's quite a bit of an evolutionary step for the business. But what do you see
Yeah.
as sort of the future? How do you think that this might add to growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. We've always, we've been an independent kind of institutional advisor, so not having implemented product business, and we're going to continue to be an independent advice-led consulting business. And this really, in our mind, extends the reach of that. It's not implemented product solution, but we have found that there are asset owners. It's less kind of common in superannuations that have grown and have internal teams, but outside of super and some at the smaller end perhaps, want external advice, want an institutional advisor, but don't really have all of the tools to implement it, or execute it, be it reporting or custody or execution. So this just provides some extra service levers that we can work with organisations that need those components. It's still advice led. It's recommending portfolios that really align to their needs and objectives. And previously, the only other solution they've had is to go into an implemented, like a balanced fund kind of wholesale kind of group product. And this was providing, I think, a really potentially a really attractive solution. So from a growth standpoint, I think it extends the reach of our institutional advice to broader markets where they need some additional service capability as well.
Yeah, yeah. And from what I understand, this mainly is targeted sort of the smaller end of the spectrum, like the
Yes.
charities, maybe some family offices. Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
And does that also allow you to then tap more into sort of the private wealth space?
Yeah, potentially. We've been working in the private wealth space for a while now. That's obviously a growing area, and they're also, a group's interested in working with an organisation like us, as they've got bigger. So, and they also can have other additional needs like reporting and various things that this can assist with. So it just provides a greater flexibility of us to help our clients with all of the different aspects that they need.
Yeah, and it's a very aligned structure as well because State Super has now become a co-owner of Frontier.
Yes.
So, and it's been a long-term client as well. So it's
Yes, it's exciting, and to have a team with Charles and 14 people join us is really exciting too.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, if I may take you back a little bit about your journey at Frontier and the changing asset consultant environment, I think what I saw one big change that Frontier has gone through over the years is when it started to implement a technology platform where basically clients could log in, find recommendations, find all sorts of information, and also with the help of a few foreign partners, I think, on this platform. And you were actually the one that led the first part of this project, weren't you?
Yes.
How did that come about?
I put my hand up, or it might have been volunteered. I can't quite remember. But yeah, look, I mean the the genesis of it really was we were finding that, particularly in superannuation, as investment teams were growing, that there were the people that we were advising to that, had their own, had a range of working needs. So some of them would want, direct curated advice from us. Some of them wanted to do their own research, but leverage our breadth of work to do that. So technology really enabled a different mechanism in which kind of the work that we were doing in our research teams could be shared, and it could be utilized in a way that, individuals wanted to. So the first project was really looking at the manager research database, and we had an internal system. But this was really looking at, well, how do we strengthen that and have a really good system that can be used externally? So um, it was an interesting project. It took a lot of mapping, and I think it strengthened our own internal processes as well, and kind of built it out so it could be evolved from here. So be that into kind of areas like private wealth or offshore in Japan. It's been really good to have done that really early work. And it now includes, that was just the database really to start with, but it includes a range of kind of tools and systems, portfolio analysis, real assets database, all sorts of different things that we use internally and that our clients can use. So it's really added, I think, a dimension of flexibility in terms of how clients can work with us.
Yeah, usually technology doesn't make the headlines in this space, but I remember quite vividly when I realized how important it was when I actually was doing an interview with one of your competitors, and the news had just come out, and I sort of brought it up. It's like, oh, have you seen that Frontier is doing this? And they're like, it's crazy. We never give our research reports out, and we have one copy and we hold it very tightly. We never put anything online, and they just have a system where you can log in. And I thought that, this is going to make it really hard to get back and talk to fund managers, because if you give them a negative rating, they'll never talk to you again. And now you're just putting it all online. Was that ever a consideration, a conversation that maybe the reports would more easily be disseminated?
I mean, it's a secure system, so we were not worried that it would kind of be available to everyone. But I mean, ultimately, we were not, closed about, what our ratings were. So if we were asked by a manager, we would talk about that. So I think we've always kind of taken an approach of, we've all got a role to play in working with asset owners, and we should be transparent about how we're thinking about things. And I think that builds better relationships, even if you start with a negative rating or not rated situation. We were. I mean, there is something to be said around, do you want to do all your thinking and work before you kind of get into a communication with a client about a new idea or a manager recommendation or, investing in Bitcoin, that sort of thing. Do you want to kind of have done lots of work before you even have that conversation? Whereas this has all our meeting notes, it has a whole range of things. It has thoughts, processes along the journey, so to speak. And so that was a conversation, because I think when you're just providing advice, you kind of do a short list. So it's managers, you do a short list, you provide a recommendation, and it's kind of the end of the process. But we were finding, particularly for asset owners with super teams, with teams, investment teams, with more sophisticated internal processes as well. They were wanting to have a conversation very early in the stage in the process. And so, we're a reasonably kind of open book. We'll start kind of with we've got these questions about a topic, and then ultimately you get to the end of a rating or review to invest. But I think it's important with all the questions in the world and things that we don't know. Investments are inherently uncertain in terms of where they'll go in the future. So I always think being able to ask the difficult questions that you don't know the answer to is just as useful as having done all the work and having the final answer that you think.
Yeah. So you haven't got any pushback from managers on the.
No. And we try and be transparent. We in terms of not just our ratings, but areas of focus as well with our research program. There's a lot of managers and products out there. We can't cover everything, so we just think it's useful to have a two-way dialogue with that universe. And yeah, no, they haven't had any particular pushback.
Yeah. So it started out as sort of organizing the database, but over the years it has grown quite a bit. And I think you already mentioned there's a lot of different tools in it, meeting notes. What is your current thinking about what's sometimes referred to as knowledge management? Because to a degree, it retains the institutional memory of Frontier as a business as well, where I think previously sometimes when in an organization, when somebody leaves, a lot of information leaves with them. But having this in place in sort of central place does retain some of that. Has your sort of ideas about knowledge management changed in that perspective?
Look, I think it's been an ongoing quest, to manage your data and knowledge well, and as technologies continue to evolve, we're in a process of really centralizing all of the data and knowledge and past work that we've done on the cloud, and really looking, you need efficiency of data access, security, data governance, and being able to extract better insight. So having things obviously dotted about in the manner of old is not the best way to extract data. And so we're in the middle of a centralization project at the moment. We've also got a private AI tool, which we've called Frank, after an internal competition.
I've met Frank, I think, at the last annual conference.
Yes. That allows that kind of data set and knowledge to be accessed through that tool, and for all of us really in a more streamlined manner.
Yeah. Now, AI is something that is obviously on a lot of people's minds. At the moment, more whether it's a bubble and it's about to burst. In terms of application to this, to the data, where do you see the biggest gains? I mean, you just mentioned this agent that has been developed, but where do you see sort of the biggest benefits? And part of the reason why I'm asking it is because I was reading a report recently from MIT, which basically looked into companies running AI pilots. And it sort of concluded that 95% of businesses got no benefit out of it whatsoever, which is not a great number. So that's keen to hear what your experience is.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's going to be a journey, and we're in a really, really relatively early phase. So, Frank for us is a really useful tool to I think it'll create efficiencies in data access. You can apply a style kind of guide to it. So there's just a kind of wording benefit. We view generally AI, just to kind of take a step back, as a strategic priority. We think it's an area where there's a lot of change, where we need to be thinking about what it means for our business. So we're working on that strategy at the moment. And we're also thinking about it a lot from an investment and economic standpoint. I think we have a range of kind of projects underway. A lot of it's kind of in that kind of efficiency space, or in the can we use it to provide a different perspective to the one we might have come up with in a qualitative sense, and understand why. So it's a kind of adding robustness to our own processes. But all of that's quite new. And we're seeing it, kind of expand out into so many different areas in the world, in businesses. And there's obviously a governance and a risk aspect to it as well. So we're using it as a tool, a supplementary tool, but I think we'll take learnings from that and continue to develop it from there, without kind of getting too ahead of ourselves on it.
So I did a recent podcast with Ashby Monk from Stanford University, the long-term investing institute there, and he is very interested in AI, and I think he has some projects going on with some businesses on the side as well. But I basically asked him, where do you think AI would fit within sort of the pension industry? And he started describing basically the idea that you could use it to get alternative viewpoints, in the sense that you could very specifically make it a specialist, but also more general at, board type of advice. And he started describing where it could be used. And I said at the end, this sounds like an asset consultant. And he sort of agreed. So I said, so are they in trouble? And he said, oh, they might be. Are you worried about that it gets to a point where, it replaces advice?
Yeah, no. Look, I mean, who knows where it will go? And I suspect, potentially some of the power of it in things we can't, yet envisage. But I do think it's potentially useful to provide separate, different perspectives and all of those things. But investing is such a challenge, thinking about particularly the total portfolio and how all the different components come together, where the risks are, where the opportunities are, what the different competing things to weigh up, risk and return and fees and all of the things, particularly in super, that you need to weigh up. It's a complex problem, and AI, I think, should be useful in processing some of that. But I don't think it takes away from the insight that an experienced investment person will have. And I don't think investment committees will have an AI advisor that they'll be as comfortable with, compared to an experienced asset consultant, where they're looking for an independent perspective from their internal CIO.
It can obviously lead to some efficiencies, but I think at the moment as well, the system is still at a stage where it makes a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
So I find that whenever I use it, I almost spend as much time correcting its mistake than I actually gain in benefits. And I sort of has this idea that we still need more evolution in that space, because at the moment it's like broadly right but specifically wrong, and it's not always that useful. But I'm very interested in this space, so it will be interesting to see what happens there. Another sort of big development is the retirement space. Obviously the regulator has put out some requirements there for people to at least develop sort of a strategic plan. I mean, it has changed a few times. There were SIPPers, now there's covenants. But the idea is that we need to basically have a more mature approach in that particular space. Now, I think you've also set up the retirement business for Frontier. Tell me a little bit about how that started and what sort of your thinking is towards this space. Do we need a whole range of new products, or is it more tweaking for a specific set of circumstances?
Yeah, it was some time ago we started to think about retirement in some ways from an investment or product standpoint, given we're from the investment side, and what that meant in terms of the member experience. What was different about it is you think a lot about My Super and different options and their collective vehicles. But retirement has a lot of challenges that go to the individual member and what they need. And I think life cycle is more common than it was back then, but that was something we did some work on. And then also, in retirement, what does a member actually need, and what would that mean for the investment product? And there's always that challenge around different circumstances and pension and all of that sort of thing. It's been really slow, I think, and in its evolution. Part of it is, there's been a range of other things that Super's also been focusing on. But I think we're now getting to a stage where we are seeing, the maturing of the system, lots of members moving into retirement. And so, I can see why the regulatory focus has been increasing. So the retirement income covenant's now been out for 3 years. And I think what it's captured is the kind of multidimensionality of the issue, you know, understanding the members' needs. So there's a whole thing around kind of what data do you have on the members, the cohorting of members, how do you communicate with the members, like what is the fit for purpose assistance, which may go to product or advice, and then kind of how do you assess whether it's been successful? So getting all of those elements lined up and interacting is a meaty challenge, and one I think the industry is still working on. But yeah, it's not specifically I think a product problem. Though obviously investments need to be made and solutions need to be found, but it's the combination of, you know, the advice, understanding the cohort and their needs, and then having the solution to put them in and the ongoing support from there.
So there's been a lot of talk about the product space, and obviously one type of solution would be something that's akin to an annuity. But then again, I also think then of the UK experience where for a long time annuities were mandatory. And the moment they stopped that, it was kind of like everybody went out of them. So they're not a very popular product for most people. Do you see a role for annuities, or are they just not popular enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always felt like they have a role as part of the solution for a particular type of member. We've done a couple of kind of workshops with groups of funds over time, led by David Carruthers at Frontier, and one of those was about longevity, and what a longevity solution would look like. And, you know, because in principle, it does seem to make sense for those looking for some certainty. I don't think it's been helped by kind of being in such a low yield environment for so long and where other markets have been so strong. Because I think when you weigh up the relative choice, maybe just being in a balanced fund or a slightly more conservative fund looks pretty good, and you don't have to lock up your money. It may be if we hit an environment where certainty you know, has more value, that annuities will have another kind of flush of interest. But I think the most recent work that APRA and ASIC have done showed, you know, quite a lot of people approaching retirement age don't feel like they have sufficient funds. So you would think that certainty would be valuable, but it's you know, with the covenant providing the tools for members to kind of work through the various solutions. I think is where the purpose of an annuity and potentially the arguments that would make members pick it up will come.
Retirement is quite a complex space because there's a lot of different levers to think about. But from an investment perspective, is there a chance that we may be also overthinking this? Because when you transition to retirement, obviously you're going to have an income stream coming out of it. But at the same time, you're probably going to be needed to be invested for still quite a number of years. If you're retired at 60, you probably got another at least 10, 15 years where you want to have some exposure probably to growth assets. That's the time where your balance is the biggest, so you get the most benefits from it as well. And at the same time, I also think some of the conversations that you have with members on just the superannuation side is hard enough to explain the differences between the investment options, let alone bringing in income streams, annuities, pooled vehicles. Are we maybe just overthinking it?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. Advisors have always had this kind of, historically this bucketing sort of approach where you just have some money in cash and then you have the longer term in something that's more growth oriented. And there's an intuitiveness to it from a member standpoint. It doesn't necessarily need to be an incredibly complex solution.
Yeah, I think it was the old Equip that used to have this approach where that plan is just, if they had to start from basically from scratch, they would just do a third cash, third fixed income, first growth assets. And that seemed to still work pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that sense, maybe it is all too complicated with adding a lot of product to the space.
And I think, we have seen, I think in life cycle or age-based default type structures, they used to de-risk quite early. into retirement. And
Yep.
I think they've recognised the point that you've made, which is, there's still a long period in retirement to go. So you don't necessarily want to de-risk. At 60, you want to maintain your growth exposure because you've potentially got another 20 plus years to go.
Yeah.
And that's as long as you can kind of take the, any volatility that comes with that, you can be better placed over the long term to maintain a good balanced portfolio.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier as well the life cycle funds, which is sort of an instrument vehicle where you could potentially see a stage where you could have this seamless transition where you don't have to necessarily think about it, because once you get to retirement, it's already de-risk. You just have to change sort of the structure that it's held in. At the same time, it's kind of interesting to see that around the time that My Super came out in the legislation, a lot more life cycle funds came out as well, which, okay, you need a new default, so that might be a good starting point to think differently about, are we still on the right track? At the same time, these things are very hard to compare with other products. Is there also a bit of you can hide a lot in a life cycle fund?
I think there's probably a range of rationales for a life cycle product. The super industry certainly become more peer aware and competitive, and there's a lot of focus about making sure you're a strongly performing fund. So in some ways that's kind of fed through the industry from a regulator perspective. I think funds also, of course, need to judge kind of what's their membership base. So if your main membership by default goes into My Super, what do you do if, say, you've got a lower risk, an older, more conservative membership base on average, compared to a younger, more risk-taking, potentially membership base in another fund, and those two defaults are being compared against each other, it may make more sense to have a life cycle product that can respond within the default to the different types of members that exist, and still being kind of comparable in a balanced survey type construct.
Yeah.
I think what I originally, when we first did the work on life cycle, what I liked about it was that it had a sense of, from the member perspective, that this, age is something you do when your assets are bigger. You don't want to be taking on too much risk. You might want to, have more moderate risk. And the fund is managing that for you without you having to think. So a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about their super default option and whether it's fit for purpose, after a decade of when you set it. And I think that's right, because we still see in super a tendency for members to increase switching in challenging market environments, and that's often the worst time to switch because they do it at the bottom. It happens at the bottom of the market.
Yeah.
After the GFCs, a lot of people we didn't see, they didn't switch back for a very long time. So that the risk of not having enough in retirement is really coming to bear there because of switching due to risk concerns. And so if you're in a life cycle product where some of that risk concern is being abated because you're near a retirement and you're in a bit less risk than you were naturally, I think it can provide a greater sense of willing to stay with it for members when you get into more tricky environments.
And I think the same is true for sort of the younger cohort, where I think a lot of life cycle funds tend to be a bit more aggressive there. So a lot of growth assets in the early years, which, if young people make a choice, they tend to go more conservatively rather than more aggressively. So it's probably good to have that setting up front, that if they don't do anything, they're in a high growth asset. And I think that's recently David spoke about that as well, where separately with his work with the Actuaries Institute, where they're looking at what is the chance of actually making your investment objective. Well, if you're in cash, you're not going to make it. And that's a different risk than how volatile is your investment, right? So it also works for the younger cohort, I think, there. Maybe finishing up, we can look a little bit about where Frontier is now. Obviously, away from the early days where everything was super, it's a much more diverse business now. There's a big insurance business that has been built up. You've been active in the private wealth space. What is sort of your sense of where the industry is evolving, because at the same time we have the consolidation, fewer funds, and we've seen also more fluidity, I think, between what was used to be silos. We had the retail funds, we had the industry funds, we had private wealth, but now people tend to move more across. So all of the organizations seem to get more sophisticated. What does it mean for your client base? What is sort of your outlook on where you might grow and how diversified it is?
So I think, I mean, we've really broadened our business. So we obviously have a heritage in superannuation, and that continues to be quite a large part of our business, including offshore as well. But we've really broadened, and as a business, as a consulting team, into more specialization of asset owner type. So we have quite an experienced insurance and liability driven team, mostly of actuaries that really are very in tune with investing for those sorts of requirements, and what that market is. And we have a team that's focused on the smaller asset owner space, be it, universities, that they can be quite sizable, charities, family office, wealth. And I think with that group, which is kind of quite diverse in and of itself, what we're seeing when they've come to us over time is they've got to a size where they can kind of contemplate an institutional advisor, and they want to really strengthen their arrangements, their governance, their portfolio, make sure it's fit for purpose, and that's kind of where Frontier comes into play. And I think what we're seeing is the growth in assets enables that. So in wealth as well, we're seeing a movement of talent between super and consulting and wealth, and we're certainly seeing wealth really look to kind of strengthen its own processes and portfolios. And that's really important. I think that's really exciting for the investment industry, fund managers as well in Australia, who have been in the institutional space and in a consolidating supermarket, but now, have this broader opportunity set as well, and wealth platforms that are really looking to kind of make sure they're bringing a strong, robust institutional quality to their client base.
Yeah, yeah. So we started off saying you've been 23 years with Frontier. You've seen a lot of change in the industry. And I remember reading earlier this year for International Women's Day, you wrote a piece that when you finished your CFA in 2001, there were only 2 women in the Melbourne chapter for the CFA. I think that has changed a bit, but what is your view at the current state of sort of the gender balance in the investment industry? Are we getting there, or are we still a long way off?
I mean, it's certainly a lot better than then. And that was a bit of a surprise because, in science and, actuaries and such, it was much more balanced. And it took me a little while to figure out too, because Frontier was always, had leading female investment people with Fiona, but others like Kerry Williams and Sarah Khan. So we were a bit of an outlier, and often, people mentioned that specifically as having kind of more women, which was great, I think. But it took me a little while to realise the investment side was more broadly was a bit poor. And I think we're seeing more women, particularly in asset consulting and in asset owners. I think then the fund manager side, it's got better, but it's off a really low base. And I think there's a range of data. We continue to track that. I think the CFA does work on that as well. A lot of male-oriented, dominated investment teams. And I just think, diversity of thought and diversity of perspective is really important in investment decision making. And you can't just have, and likewise, gender has a role in that. And just to kind of having one woman is not sufficient to open that diversity gate. And for other types of diversity too. So I think there's definitely more to go. I think there's a lot more, senior experienced women and in the industry that people can look to, and that's really important too, to see what success looks like and to see different ways of being in a senior role. So I think that will feed on itself still.
Yeah.
But every organisation should be thinking about that aspect. It's something we cover in our manager research as well. We think, just continuing to discuss that topic's an important way that change occurs.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that you didn't initially realize, because obviously Frontier has that heritage. And I mean, having Fiona Trafford-Walker there, I think she, is one of the big figures of this industry. Was there a point where you sort of went like, oh, not every organization has a Fiona? Is there sort of that realization that you went, this is actually quite a unique situation?
Yeah, no, it was. Well, I mean, certainly at the investment teams when I started at Frontier were very small. They were mostly male, but very small, so it wasn't kind of a fair judgment. But boards and investment committees were mostly male. Fund managers teams were mostly male. I remember going on a research trip where we're covering a range of asset classes, but mostly private markets. And I think we met with around 30 firms, so a lot of different investment people through those meetings. And I got to the end and I thought, oh, we've met with like maybe three, maybe not 300 people, maybe over 100 people from investment teams. And I think 3 were female
Right.
in the whole trip. And I thought that's, it just kind of, once you kind of didn't notice it for a little while and then you're like, oh, no, that's not.
Yeah.
That's just low. That's a low level. So it kind of came to bear from a couple of different elements. But I think a lot of work's been done on that. I think organisations see the merit in a broader perspective and team, so we're on a positive journey, I think, with it.
Yeah. Excellent.
I don't really know what it is about investments that would make it like this, to be honest. But
well, I do remember that one of the early podcasts that actually Daniel Grioli did for me, he was talking to Denise Selden, a fund manager in the US. And she started out with, I think, her uncle on the stock exchange floor. And that was at a time that women were not allowed to visit the same cafeterias or something. I think there was a sort of form of segregation. So at least we've come a long way since then.
yes.
But yeah, we still got some way to go in other aspects. But Kim, thank you very much for your time. It was great talking to you. And yes, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the i3 podcast. For more information, please visit our website at www.i3, that's the letter I, the number 3-invest.com. And don't forget to like, subscribe and review. Thank you very much.